Come closer to the fire. Deserts collect what people forget elsewhere. They keep it in rocks, in heat, in the long pause between one wind and the next. East of Joshua Tree, there's a wooden shack that calls itself a library. No sign, no number, just shelves of blank books that somehow remember the ones who held them. Tonight's story isn't about ghosts. It's about memory that decided it didn't need words anymore.
The first thing anyone noticed was that it shouldn't have survived the summer. A one-room structure of plywood and corrugated roof, standing on a patch of sand 50 miles from a town that barely counted as one. It had no door, only a curtain bleached the color of regret. The locals called it the library because every few weeks new books appeared inside. Plain covers, cream pages, no titles, no authors, no numbers to explain why heat hadn't erased them. People found it mostly by accident. Hikers lost the trail, mechanics testing engines, a pilot once who landed wrong. All said the same. The air cooled when they stepped through the curtain. The wind stopped rehearsing its threats. The shelves faced west, as though to borrow the last light of the day, and the book smelled faintly of cedar and rain, which the desert remembers only in theory. That's how the story reached Nadia Keller, a field archivist for a regional university who specialized in cataloging ruins that didn't belong to anyone. She had spent years tagging petroglyphs, measuring ghost mines, interviewing owners of half-collapsed diners who swore Route 66 used to come closer. When the rumor of a library with amnesia hit an anthropology listserv, she laughed once and then opened her calendar. Curiosity has its own gravity. She left Palm Springs before dawn, headlights cutting through a wind that still hadn't decided to be hot. Her rental Jeep coughed dust like punctuation. By the time she turned off the main road, the world had become a lesson in how many versions of beige exist. A mile marker tilted at the kind of angle that says, even the wind pays taxes. She followed the coordinates until the GPS surrendered and the horizon stopped pretending to change. Then, suddenly, there it was. A shack too small for ambition and too stubborn for logic. It had no footprints around it, no tire tracks newer than last season. Yet the curtain in the doorway moved as if someone inside had been expecting weather. Nadia parked, listened for other engines, heard only distance. The heat already worked its arithmetic on her skin. Inside, silence shaped like listening. 4 shelves of wood, smoothed by hands, each holding rows of beige volumes, identical except for the small thumb dents that come from being read by living people. No titles, no stamps. A narrow table held a guest book filled halfway, entries written without ink, indentations pressed into paper as if the pen itself had forgotten pigment, but remembered purpose. She touched one of the blank books. The page gave slightly, cool despite air that could fry an apology. Her fingers tingled, the way they did when electricity warned, but didn't punish. She opened to the middle. There were words, faint gray, visible only when the light bent at a certain angle. She read a line aloud before realizing she was whispering. We never meant to stay this long. The letters faded like breath on glass. She shut the book and let her hand rest on the cover, as though closing a pulse. Joshua Tree attracts people who mistake solitude for clarity. By evening, she sat in the only cafe still serving, her recorder idle beside the sugar packets. The waitress, a woman who looked made of wind, poured coffee until it understood its place. When Nadia asked about the library, the woman smiled the way locals do when a roomer pays for lunch. "Been there since before I was," she said. "Some call it art, some call it a hoarder's joke." The old ranger said it showed up after a flood that never made the papers. Folks write things down, things they don't want anymore. The desert takes them. Fair trade. A man at the counter added, without turning, "Sometimes the books talk back. You open one, and it knows your handwriting." He laughed into his cup, but it wasn't humor. It was recognition. Nadia wrote the words, "talk" back in her notebook and underlined them once. The waitress refilled the cup without being asked and said, "You planning to sleep out there?" "I wasn't." "Good." The wind changes names after midnight. Outside, the air had cooled just enough to believe it was safe. She decided to camp 5 miles away, close enough to see the horizon bruise with dusk. In the distance, a small amber glow hung where the library ought to be, though no electricity fed that part of the desert. By midnight, the wind had stopped moving in a straight line. She heard something like paper shifting against itself, soft, deliberate. The glow on the horizon pulsed faintly, as if a lantern behind thin walls turned a slow circle. She walked toward it with the kind of curiosity that forgets hierarchy. Inside the library, the air smelled like ozone and rain that never came. The books trembled on their shelves as though someone had walked past too quickly. She picked one at random. It was heavier than before. When she opened it, the first page bore handwriting, her own, a line from her graduate dissertation, a paragraph she had deleted years ago because it sounded too sure of itself. Every book she pulled carried something familiar. Fragments of field notes, a sentence from an email never sent, the inventory from a dig where she had lied about finding anything. Memory is a generous archivist. It keeps more than requested. The books weren't written by strangers. They were written by everyone who had touched them. Words appeared only for the reader they belonged to, and only as long as recognition allowed. She realized that's why they had no titles. The titles changed with the visitor. She found one volume colder than the rest. When opened, its pages whispered softly, not words, but the cadence of someone thinking. The sound matched her own pulse. She closed it quickly and felt the paper cool against her palms, as if the desert itself needed her temperature to stay alive. Morning came with a humorless sun. She placed 3 books in the shade outside to test them. Within minutes, the covers faded, the pages blanked. She brought them back in, and the gray traces returned, rearranged. The words were different. Now, half sentences of someone else's childhood, a broken tricycle, the smell of toast, the taste of hose water in July. The library did not record, it recycled. By afternoon, a hiker arrived, drawn by the same rumor. His name was Don Holloway, retired something. He didn't say what. He had a map folded too many times and a face that had practiced disbelief. She led him inside, curious to see what the place would show a stranger. He reached for a book, laughed once, then turned pale. "That's my wife's handwriting," he said. "She passed in 09. We used to..." I read her notes at night. He ran a finger across a line only he could see, and nodded slowly, as though a conversation had been resumed mid-sentence. Then he set the book down and left without a goodbye. The air where he'd stood felt charged, humming faintly like a transformer. Nadia wrote, "Responds to personal memory, restores fragments, unpredictable duration. That night, she dreamed of hundreds of books breathing in sync, their covers lifting slightly with each inhale. When she woke, her notebook was gone. In its place lay one of the blank volumes, open to a page that said, faintly, "Field notes belong here now." 2 days later, the desert decided to remember weather. Clouds gathered from directions the compass never planned for. Wind arrived not as chaos, but as orchestration. She ran the perimeter ropes, tied down her tent, and still the air lifted sand in sheets, fine enough to erase thought. She reached the library by instinct. The curtain whipped sideways. The books held their positions. Inside, the air was calm, the kind of stillness that happens between inhalation and choice. The shelves vibrated like tuning forks. She heard voices, not whispering, not words, but the timbre of recollection. Laughter that might have been her brother's, the cough of a long-gone professor, her mother calling her name once, from a kitchen she hadn't entered in 15 years. Each voice, brief, exact, gone. The storm outside howled its full thesis. Inside, one book fell open on the floor, its pages flicking themselves to the back, where an inscription had formed. Memory needs space to breathe. She tore a page carefully, set it on the table, and wrote her name. The ink soaked faster than paper allows. For a second, she felt dizzy, like standing too close to a signal tower. The storm collapsed almost immediately after. When she stepped outside, the desert looked rearranged. Dunes smoothed, air rinsed clean. The tracks leading there were gone, including her own. The library's wooden walls shimmered briefly, then dulled to their usual patience. She drove back toward the main road with the caution of someone transporting silence. The radio refused to pick up stations until she reached cell range. Every time she passed a reflective road marker, she thought of the beam of light that had pulsed inside those walls, memory made visible. In Palm Springs, she tried to file a preliminary report. The form demanded location, ownership, cultural period. None applied. She closed the laptop and instead mailed a handwritten letter to the university, enclosing a single page from one of the blank books. It was blank again, of course. She wrote on the envelope, "For archives that remember themselves." Weeks passed. Photos she had taken came back corrupted, each file showing only beige horizon and faint outlines of shelves. Yet sometimes, when she turned on her recorder at home, it hissed for a moment and then played the sound of pages turning in a room without wind. Months later, a postcard arrived with no return address. On it, an image of the desert. The handwriting was hers, but older. "We never meant to stay this long." She keeps it on her desk, unframed. Every so often, when she works late, she swears the card smells faintly of cedar and rain.
Not every book needs an author. Some are written by the act of being touched, by the fingerprints that refuse to vanish. Out past Joshua Tree, there's a room that keeps the stories people forget to keep. If you find it, don't catalog it. Open one book, read what it remembers of you, then close it before the wind turns. The desert values silence more than ownership, and it always finishes the sentence you meant to leave unsaid.